Hello, my name is Grant with Elru Bike, and today I'd like to go over some of the differences between an enduro style mountain bike and a trail style mountain bike. We won't be talking so much about the specs and all of the nitty-gritty details and the measurements and the geometry, but really more trying to summarize the experiential differences between the two styles. And what I mean by that is what you actually feel and experience when you're on these bikes, when you're pedaling uphill, downhill, how tired you are at the end of the ride, that sort of a thing, and just the overall level of funness that they provide, at least from my perspectives. Okay, let's start by talking about the bikes that we have up here. First of all, don't tell my wife that I brought the bikes inside. I tried to do this in the garage. It didn't work out very well. So I'm now in the basement. But just keep that between you and me. Okay, let's jump in. Let's meet the bikes that we have here. All right, so on this side I've got the Pivot Mach 6 Carbon, 155 mil rear travel. This is fully a enduro style bike. Over here we have a more trail focused, some call it an all-mountain. I think their website actually calls it an all-mountain bike. 120 mil of rear travel. Pivot Trail 429, if I didn't already say that. So, this bike, bought it in 2014. It has been my one and only bike since then, up until recently. Rode it on everything, uphill, downhill, lift serve, bike parks, you name it. Literally done everything with this bike. Loved it. Upgraded 2 months ago, decided to go with something a little different, stuck with Pivot, had great luck with it, into some of the categories that lead to the actual ride experience. The first is, I'm going to talk about the pedalability, right? How easy it is, how difficult it is, how tired you are, that sort of a thing. Again, I rode this bike for about 9 years. And I remember almost from day one thinking, I love this bike, I just wish it was more efficient pedaling. It was so arduous and so difficult pedaling up those long grinds. I live in Utah, northern Utah, and we have a lot of vertical ups and then a whole lot of vertical downs. So on the way up, I was always just really having to work hard. I remember thinking, gosh, I am breathing, no matter how good of shape I'm in. It never seems to really get any easier. So pedaling efficiency on this guy was never the strong suit. And in fact, it was hard to go multiple days in a row as far as biking, especially if they were long, hard bike rides. This just exhausted me. On the other hand, this 429, it's a dream to pedal. In fact, I have never really ridden, aside from my road bike, these clipless style pedals. I don't know if you can see them. This bike lends itself to such efficiency and such joy to pedal and pedal hard, and you just really feel connected to the bike to the point where I've had to take a step back and been willing to take a step back in the comfort and just familiarity I have from like 9+ years on these flat pedals with the grippy shoes, to being clipped in, slightly terrified, just for that extra pedaling efficiency. It just works perfectly with this bike. It's truly a rocket uphill. I can ride multiple days in a row, even if they're super long days and there's a ton of climbing involved. I just don't get as tired at the end of the day. My muscles aren't as exhausted the next day. I feel a lot fresher. This is just a pleasure to pedal. Okay, grip, climbing, that sort of a thing, corners, berms. This bike has always semi-struggled with getting grip going uphill, even if it's on like slick rock or that sort of a thing. It handles berms very well. It has the smaller wheels make it very maneuverable. The small cockpit, I can just move this thing around however I want to. Again, I don't know if it's the shock is oriented a little differently here. I don't know if that's part of it. The wheelbase is slightly bigger. The tires are 29s. Maybe that contributes to it. This thing grips and it just climbs. I'm always amazed. I'll climb something and or as I'm approaching something, I'll think, there's no way I'm going to be able to climb this, and then just right up I go all the time. And another thing I'd like to call out, I can stand up instead of always having my butt in the saddle pedaling with this thing, trying to keep the grip in the rear tire. I can stand up on this thing and really go at it if I need to or want to, and I don't lose grip. This is truly amazing. This bike, not so much. I have to keep my butt in the saddle. I really have to focus on maintaining a smoother pedal. This, it is great. Okay, next, ride clearance. What I mean by that, they say there's a given height between the ground and this bottom bracket, and it would make sense that if your crank arm spindle is oriented right in the middle of that, that would set the clearance. In addition to that as a fixed point, you've got your crank arm length. So these two are slightly different. I know it has nothing to do with the type of the bike, because anyway, these crank arms are 175, these are 170. I don't know if you can see this. These have more gashes and dings on them than I could even begin to explain. I pedal strike with this bike constantly, and to be honest, it's not a cosmetic concern. Almost all of my major crashes, except for tire washouts, have been from pedal strikes at speed or at the wrong time, and I go spilling. Definitely a bummer. So clearance is super important, and you would think an enduro bike would probably have more clearance. I have not pedal struck hardly at all with these. I think maybe once or twice. The clearance is way better on this bike. So the bottom bracket height, that's the strange thing. They measure the same, 13.6. When I pull out a tape measure, this is a half an inch higher, and it does have two settings. You can adjust where that bottom bracket height is. It's in the lowest setting now. Tape measure says they're a half an inch difference from the crank arm. I don't know how that actually adds up, but at any rate, that if it's only the crank arm being 170 versus 175, go 170 all day long, because pedal strikes are terrible. Okay, next let's talk about tire size. We've got 27.5s over here, and we've got 29s on the trail bike. Now, I'm noticing some of the new bikes are the mullets, where you've got the 29er up front, 27 in the back. I don't have any experience with that. I hear they're a hoot. This is my first bike as the 29er. Much less experience on the 29er than I have on the 27.5. My take, the 27.5 inch tires are much more quickly maneuverable. You can change directions with them. It's more flickable. It's maybe more fast feeling. But there are some downsides. The 29er, maybe it feels a bit more, you have to be a little more intentional with things as far as when you want to change direction and that sort of a thing. But there are some big benefits, like rolling over. It is much easier to just kind of motor over all that trail garbage that you see when you're trying to do some more technical climbs. It clears those gaps in the rocks a little bit better. So I'm really enjoying the 29er. I see the benefit in the 27.5, but I think for me, the tip is to the 29er. The climbing efficiency that you get out of it, the ability to just motor over obstacles is way better. And it also seems like that translates to the downhill as well. You can just roll over obstacles a lot better. So again, that doesn't really have anything to do with the enduro versus the trail style bike, but 29ers are a good thing, even if you're short like me. I was worried for a little while. I remember I demoed a 29er a couple of years ago, and I thought, gosh, this thing's terrible. It's so hard to turn. It just falls over in the corners. What am I doing? Am I too short to ride it? I'm with a small frame. Does it even make sense? And you know what? Who cares? It does. It works for me. This bike, you could even get this in an extra small with the 29er. And it's been great so far. All right, so next category is downhill experience. They're different. One isn't necessarily better than the other, it's just different. So I guess for a quick summary, this Enduro, I don't think I've ever been able to find a place where I'm uncomfortable going downhill and thought, oh gosh, this feels a little sketchy, maybe I should slow down. Whereas I've definitely already found that on this bike. This bike seems to, so there's 155 mils versus 120 mil. That's about 1.25 inches difference. And I'm sure there's some geometry and shock placement considerations, but just for the sake of this, to keep it simple, that 1.25 inch difference in travel in the rear shock is noticeable over a lot of fast, jittery stuff like washboard things. This seems to cope better with it, keep its traction better, and I don't have to hit the brakes as hard. I have to be more cautious on the washboard stuff on this particular bike. I also remember I was going above 25 miles an hour and the trail had a lot of these bigger rocks in it and I was just having to go over them. There wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to go around. It was just a real rough trail. At that point, I felt like I had reached the limit of what this bike was capable of. I honestly don't remember if the rear shock was set to trail or to open. That may have had something to do with it, but I distinctly remember thinking, okay, I have reached the limit on this particular bike. Again, this bike, in the 9 years, I never thought, oh gosh, this trail is way too much. I need to slow down for the bike to handle. It's always my level of comfort. I don't want to die, so I slow down. Not the bike is not capable of handling this. It feels like there is some limitations on the downhill on this particular bike. That's just kind of the trade-off. Next, let's talk about the rideability, multiple day rideability of these bikes. Again, this bike is not the most efficient, and it ends up leaving me feeling exhausted because I have to work really, really hard, and there's a whole lot of climbing where I'm at. If that's not where you are, if you're doing lift serve, this is a great bike for that. If you're having to climb 1,000 to 3,000 vertical feet to then descend that, this bike is great. I can do that multiple days in a row on this, 4, 5 days in a row. I consider going 25, 50 miles, whatever, it doesn't matter. This bike is way more comfortable for way longer, for way more days in a row. This bike is tough for that. There you go. Okay, before we wrap it up, fun. I mountain bike because I enjoy it, because I think it's a super lot of fun. It's great physical fitness. It's great to hang out with your friends and to meet new people. It's great to explore, the great outdoors, that kind of stuff. But honestly, it's mostly about the fun factor. So this bike is a hoot. Especially when you're going downhill. It's kind of that punk rock feel where you just go. You just mash on that accelerator and you're just jamming downhill. Every little thing you can just soak it up and you can move around it and you can flick the bike however you want to. Super nimble. Again, I have never felt like the trail I was on was too much for this bike. I could just ride it as hard as I wanted to. Comparing it over to this trail bike, again, I don't have as much experience with it. I've only had it for about 2 months or so. But I remember distinctly noticing when I was demoing this bike, it's not that the capability is less per se, it's just much more precise. It's a much more surgical approach to descending. And it's not that this is more fun. This is just extremely precise, and it's actually very rewarding. You pick your lines. It's a little more thoughtful. It's a different experience in the sense that this is definitely fully capable up to a point. And to be honest, I ride in that 80 to 90% capability most of the time. as far as myself and on trails anyway. So this bike lends itself very well to the riding style I do most of the time. Okay. All right, so lastly, let's try to wrap all this up. High-level differences. This bike is a hoot. It is so much fun downhill, but you are going to have to work like heck to get this bike uphill. This bike is a rocket. The harder you push it, the more rewarding it is. It just goes and goes and goes. It's a very pleasurable bike. It's fun. It is very rewarding it seems like it lends itself to a more intentional style of riding as far as precision goes. So I think the pedals sum this up very well. In addition, this is the kind of bike that it's wonderfully suited to flat pedals and some sticky shoes. This bike is wonderfully suited to a pair of super rigid clipless or clip-in, whatever, shoes, because you just lock in and you go. So I hope that helps. When you're trying to find a new bike, there are so many options out there, so many different styles, and let's say you have a favorite brand. Well, gosh, there's category after category. Tire size to consider. How much travel do you want? What kind of components do you want? It's actually completely overwhelming. And at the end of the day, at least for me, all I really want is a bike that's enjoyable. I enjoy both of these style bikes. The one I'm enjoying the most right now is this one. It's new. I love the efficiency of it. I love how rewarding it is to just get in, pedal, and just to have rides that I've never been able to experience on this before. Cutting it short, cutting it done. Anyway, let's wrap there. Grant, Elru Bike, thank you so much. Bye.